Welcome to the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast. Do you dread hearing the question, what's for dinner? Whether you spend your days keeping up with toddlers, running kids to after-school activities, or juggling a career and family, getting dinner on the table can be a struggle for us all. I'm Mariefiebach, a business owner, wife, and mom of 4. I'm on a mission to build stronger families one dinner at a time, and I'm here with tips, tricks, and inspiration you need to feed your family tonight. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast, episode 140. I am your host, Mariefiebach. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Today's episode is actually a replay from last July. It is all about using summer veggies, and my ideas about summer veggies haven't changed much in a year, but there's some great inspiration. It was good for me to listen to it too because I'd forgotten about some of the things that I haven't made in a while. I'm so excited for some of the great, amazing produce that is finally becoming available because it's summer. I hope you can use this podcast to get some inspiration and enjoy some summer produce of your own. It is July here in Kansas, and there are tomatoes and zucchini everywhere. Now, in the past, I have made feeble attempts at a garden. I have grown tomatoes and various other vegetables. I have found that in recent years, my time and energy can be spent better other places, and I'm happy to let other people grow those things for me, and I can purchase them at the farmer's market or sometimes even in my local grocery stores. But the reality is there is nothing like a summer tomato or fresh summer zucchini or fresh summer herbs. They're everywhere right now. If your neighbor has a garden, they usually have bounty. Friends are often sharing garden bounty. The farmers markets are full of beautiful fresh vegetables. For years, there was a house just down the street from us that would sell all sorts of garden vegetables, especially tomatoes. They were farmers, and then they had friends that lived in this house, so they would come into town and would spend their days selling their tomatoes and melons and peppers and all sorts of beautiful things. And it was so great because it was a minute from my house. On my drive home from anywhere that I go, I could get farmers market, beautiful, fresh produce. A couple of years ago, the people that lived in that house moved out, and so our lineup with tomatoes has gone away, and it's been really sad. But there is a farmer's market that comes once a week to a store really close to my house, and so I'm able to have access to good fresh veggies, and occasionally a neighbor or two will share some of their bounty with me. But now is the time to enjoy some of these great summer vegetables. And I'm kind of just going to run through some of easy ways that you can use them. Some of the ways I'm going to talk about today, there are recipes attached. Most of them are just concepts that work really well for people that use recipes as suggestions. So if you're a person who uses a recipe to the T, you may want to skip ahead or just be ready to start Googling some recipes, because I actually haven't written recipes for a lot of these things. And there are plenty of other bloggers that have. I'm going to let them stick with it. I don't think the world needs another basic zucchini bread recipe. There's thousands of them out there. But we're going to start with my favorite summer vegetable. And I know vegetable fruit, my kids will get on me about calling it, but let's just talk about tomatoes. I love a good fresh summer tomato. And there are so many things that you can do with a summer tomato. My favorite is to make fresh tomato pasta sauce. Years ago, my sister-in-law gifted me my favorite cookbook of all time. It was called The Cook's Bible, and it was a combination of 2 different books that were written by Christopher Kimball, who is now with Milk Street, but founded America's Test Kitchen and Cooks Illustrated many years ago. And this particular recipe is so perfect in its simplicity. And it basically is just tomatoes and salt, a little bit of balsamic vinegar, a little bit of garlic, a little bit of pepper, and lots of fresh basil and a few dried herbs. And you just chop that up and leave it sit on your counter with extra virgin olive oil and let it marinate at like room temperature for a few hours. Then you cook the pasta and just pour it over this fresh tomato and olive oil mixture. My daughter was talking about this. She goes, "That's the pasta you make about once a year, Mom." And she's right, because it only happens about once a year that I have enough fresh tomatoes, because you need like several pounds of fresh tomatoes in order to make this beautiful fresh tomato pasta. But it screams summer to my family. My family loves it, and I'll make it about once a year. The other fun thing to make with fresh tomatoes is fresh salsa. And you can get into the debate of blended or chunky salsa. And I'd love to hear in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group what you think about blended or chunky salsa. But fresh salsa can be super simple. Tomatoes, jalapenos, onions, a little bit of salt, a little bit of lime juice, and you're done. If you want to get fancy, you can add some cilantro to that. And you can have it all chopped and chunky, or you can just throw everything in the blender and call it good. But there's nothing quite like a fresh tomato salsa on a summer afternoon with some really good tortilla chips. And while we're talking about really good tortilla chips, I am usually the girl who is happy to buy the off-brand of anything. But the on-the-border cafe-style tortilla chips are just in a league of their own. There is something about the thin and crispy airiness of those tortilla chips. Try them sometime. I'm not sponsored in any way by them, but when you have those, the regular tortilla chips from Aldi or Kroger will never be the same. If we're talking about summer tomatoes, we can never overlook the bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. And I've said before, the best way to cook bacon is in the oven. I should probably develop a recipe for that and actually get the times all down. I usually like thick cut bacon, and it takes about 15 minutes in a 400 degree oven to get the thick cut bacon a little bit chewy and a little bit crispy. The debate for chewy versus crispy bacon is on. Bring it on. But I will always be team chewy bacon. So I respect you crispy bacon people out there, but I am always team chewy bacon. I think that's why I like that thick cut bacon. But cook the bacon ahead of time. You can cook it in bulk weeks ahead of time and keep it in your freezer, or you can cook it in the morning so you don't have to have a hot oven in the afternoon. When we make bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches, we always make them on toast. There's something about having that textural difference of the crunchy and the soft, and then you get the juicy tomato and the crisp lettuce. All of those different textural contrasts just make for the perfect sandwich. In my house, I like to put mayonnaise on mine. My children eat it dry. They don't like any kind of condiment. Growing up, it was always Miracle Whip. And we've talked about that recently in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group, if you are Miracle Whip or mayonnaise. I grew up with Miracle Whip, and I am now firmly in the mayonnaise camp. But a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich without mayonnaise is just a travesty to me. My brother-in-law likes to have it with a goopy fried egg on top. And if you are into goopy fried eggs, that is just like, sounds divine. I sometimes am into goopy fried eggs, and sometimes my stomach's like, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But if you like a goopy fried egg, try adding that to your bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich and see what you think. The other thing about bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwiches is I feel it is very important to put salt and pepper on top of the tomato. The salt just makes the tomato taste more tomatoey, if that makes any sense. And the pepper just enhances the whole flavor. Or if you're using like a pepper bacon, then you're good. You don't need the pepper on the tomato. But a little bit of coarse sea salt on the tomato inside the sandwich is just essential to getting all of the best flavor out of a tomato. While we're talking about getting the best flavor out of a tomato, there is a beautiful thing of caprese salad, which is tomatoes and fresh mozzarella and basil and a little olive oil and balsamic vinegar, and call it quits. And you can arrange those on skewers, and you can arrange it on plates and platters. You know, this podcast is Feed Your Family Tonight, and I have to be honest with you. My kids will eat the salsa. They'll eat a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, and they love my fresh pasta. But a lot of these things that I'm talking about, I'm making for myself for lunch because my kids aren't the biggest fans. I don't know how your kids are about garden fresh vegetables. I hope that they love them. But if they don't and you do, there is no shame in making a few special lunches just for yourself, which is something that I always try to do this time of year with some of the great garden bounty. I can't end talking about tomatoes until I talk about cherry or grape tomatoes. They tend to grow easier in our area of Kansas than the regular tomatoes, and it seems like it's very easy to get yourself a nice bag of fresh cherry tomatoes, but they kind of have a thicker skin and they can be a little bit more difficult to deal with. You can't really make a BLT out of cherry tomatoes. My favorite thing to do with cherry tomatoes is to blister them. Take a rimmed baking sheet and line it with parchment paper. You could also use aluminum foil, but I really prefer parchment paper. I am going to link into the show notes my parchment paper that I buy. I usually buy it in 500 or sometimes even 1,000 sheets. And I just keep it in my house all the time. It's not very expensive and the sheets are pre-cut to exactly fit inside a rimmed baking sheet, which is perfect. And you want to have something inside that baking sheet because blistered tomatoes can make an ooey gooey mess and it's a pain to clean. And with the parchment paper or foil, you can just toss the mess. It's great. But you just take the tomatoes and put them on the rimmed baking sheet, sprinkle them with a little bit of salt, drizzle a little bit of olive oil, and put them under the broiler until they burst and they start oozing out their juices and parts of the tops will start to become blackened. You can eat that warm, just straight. You can eat it on top of pasta, but my favorite way to eat it is cold, almost like a tomato jam on a piece of toast with a little bit of goat cheese. And oh my gosh, that is just summer to me. I love blistered cherry tomatoes. So if you have a bunch of cherry tomatoes, please blister them and try them because it totally changes the flavor and the texture of the tomato into something that is just sweet and earthy and irresistible. Okay, so we've talked enough about tomatoes. We need to move on to zucchini. Zucchini is a little bit ubiquitous, and there are people that love zucchini. There are people that aren't big fans of zucchini. My personal favorite way is to have my zucchini with a side of sugar, flour, and cocoa powder. I love zucchini bread and zucchini cake, anything with chocolate in it. I'm a big fan of all of those recipes, sweetbreads and cakes to make with zucchini. And one of my little tips with that is my kids, not such big fans of zucchini. I've said before, my kids like their raw vegetables, but they're not so much fans of them cooked. But if you peel the zucchini before you shred it, then sometimes they don't notice that it's zucchini in there. Now, I'm not a huge fan of like sneaking things into my kids' food because I have seen that backfire. My kids have been served, not by me, but other people, like brownies that have like chunks of vegetables in them and they lose trust. So I'm not a big fan of that. I mean, I'm happy to say it's zucchini bread, but if like seeing the green flecks turns off your kids, the one way to get around it is to peel the skin off the zucchini. Now, the big rage right now, everybody knows about zoodles. I personally do not have a spiralizer. If you don't have a spiralizer, you can buy pre-made zoodles in the store, which is kind of handy. You can buy them fresh or frozen at major supermarkets, or you can run your zucchini through a mandolin. I happen to have a mandolin and it'll like use the julienne setting and it'll make long, thin strips, which are like zoodles. Or you can take a vegetable peeler and just peel ribbons of zucchini, and that works to make zoodles if you don't have a spiralizer. I like to keep kitchen gadgets that I use frequently, and in our family right now, a spiralizer is just not something that is worth my cabinet space. I tend to use my mandolin because I have one. I don't have an expensive mandolin. I always use the guard with it because the stories about slicing off your finger with a mandolin are real and you can do it. So use the guard or get some of those cut safe gloves that you can use if you're using a mandolin, or just get a spiralizer if you are a family that likes a lot of zoodles. But there's a couple of things about zoodles is they can get mushy really fast. And there's a couple of things that you want to keep in mind when you're doing zoodles. The first thing is I find that if you salt the zoodles and let them leak out some of their excess moisture before you cook them, they don't go mushy as fast. So that's one thing that you can do. Salt them and just kind of put them in a colander and let them leak out their moisture, and then gently press them with a towel or a paper towel to absorb some of the extra moisture. That works with cucumbers too. But when you're making the zoodles, let them kind of exude some of their excess moisture and then cook them very, very briefly, or don't cook them at all and add hot ingredients to them. And that will just warm them up, and it's going to maintain their textural integrity, and it's going to make them a lot more palatable because no one wants a mushy zoodle. My favorite way to have zucchini is grilled with a little bit of Greek salad dressing on them. I don't like to marinate them before because I find that it gets kind of mushy and it doesn't work well, but I will cut my zucchini in planks and salt it. And then again, press out as much water as possible after the salt has sat on the zucchini for a while. And then I put it on a screaming hot grill and grill it on both sides, and then drizzle it with a little bit of Greek salad dressing. I have a Greek salad dressing recipe in the Feed Your Family Tonight cookbook. And it's basically lemon juice and olive oil and oregano and salt, and just a little bit of that on the zucchini that's kind of blackened on the outside. Still has a little bit of that crunch. I don't like it really mushy, but that is one of my favorite things to do. I'll make a big batch of it, and sometimes I'll eat it like leftover, like in a wrap with some of that tomato jam from those blistered cherry tomatoes. Oh my gosh, so good. So I've really only kind of talked about two vegetables, but they're so common right now this time of year, tomatoes and zucchini, two of the biggest things for summer bounty. When we were in a community supported agriculture program and we had our CSA boxes, there were lots of other vegetables that I got to experiment and try with. But right now, last week's podcast was about it's okay to be boring. And I'm kind of in a boring season of life where I'm going to my old standbys and I'm not trying things that are too fresh or new right now. I'm just going to talk about what I'm doing today. And if you have some fresh new vegetables that you've been having fun experimenting with, please share those in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group, because I bet there's other people that want to know about some of those other exotic vegetables, or even not so exotic, but other vegetables besides tomatoes and zucchini that are in the garden bounty right now. But I can't talk about garden bounty without talking about fresh herbs. Now, I have not planted a garden in several years, but every year I have at least one pot of herbs on my patio. I am a huge fan of fresh herbs. What do you do with fresh herbs? Well, you chop them up and you put them on things. I mean, that's the basics. And you can put it on just about anything. We had a pasta the other night that I was serving alongside our grilled chicken, and I just cooked up the pasta. I drained it out. I added a little bit of butter and lemon zest and some chopped fresh thyme, and left a little bit of that pasta water in with it so that it kind of sauced up a bit. It was so good. And there was nothing to it. It was lemon zest and some thyme from my garden. If you have access to an abundance of basil, please make some pesto. There is nothing quite like a homemade pesto. There are lots of recipes out there. I highly recommend finding one that blanches the basil first in hot water and then shocks it in ice water. It's going to keep your basil a bright green. Traditional pesto is made with pine nuts, but pine nuts can be kind of expensive. And so I usually make mine with walnuts, and I find that it has a really good flavor, a really good texture. Basil pesto is good on everything. I have a recipe for a breakfast sandwich that I just use like a jarred pesto with, and just a little smidgen of pesto on a sandwich will just take it from ho-hum to gourmet in an instant. So please make some pesto if you have access to basil. My absolute favorite thing, and my kids love it to make with fresh herbs, is rosemary roasted potatoes. And I just chop potatoes into 1/4-inch dice, and I toss it with some olive oil and salt, and then I put in lots of chopped fresh rosemary and roast it in the oven at 425 degrees until they're all brown and crispy. And that rosemary scent just fills the entire house. It is so yummy. So if you have rosemary, please do some rosemary roasted potatoes. You won't be disappointed. It is so good. Ranch dressing is nothing but a bunch of herbs and a little bit of buttermilk and maybe some mayo. You take all the herbs in your garden and chop them up. But the key to making ranch dressing taste like ranch and not just a bunch of herbs with buttermilk is to put in lots of dill. Dill is what makes things taste like ranch. And so if you're wanting to make some ranch dressing, make sure that you've got some fresh dill. If you don't have fresh dill, then you can add some dried dill in with your fresh herbs and you're going to still get that ranchy flavor. I have on my website my blue cheese ranch dressing. It's my standard blue cheese dressing, but you add a little bit of dill to it and it makes it taste like ranch. And oh my goodness, so good. So if you have herbs or you have access to fresh herbs this summer, just try chopping them up and putting them on just about anything. You'll be amazed how a simple fresh herb will make a world of difference in anything that you're making. I want to hear what summer bounty you are using right now, how you are cooking it. I know there are way more ideas than the ones that I presented here. I kind of did this podcast to spark your mind and get your brain thinking about some things. That's how I kind of like to cook. I like to see what other people are doing and it gets my mind twirling on different combinations. And if you're that kind of person, then this was the podcast for you. For now, friends, we will catch you in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group and we'll talk with you next week. Take care.